$38 trillion. Let me say that again slowly. $38 trillion. That's the number staring back at us from the US Treasury website right now. And here's the part that should terrify you. They just added $1 trillion to that pile in 2.5 months. Not 2 years, not even 6 months, 75 days. That's faster than any time outside of the pandemic emergency spending. This is not some theoretical economic problem your grandkids will deal with. This is happening right now and it's accelerating. Look, I know what you're thinking. Everyone talks about the debt. Politicians promise to fix it, economists write papers about it, and absolutely nothing changes. But here's what nobody wants to tell you, and what I'm going to lay out in painful detail today. There is literally no way to stop this train. Not with cuts, not with taxes, not with any politically viable solution that exists in our current system. And once you see the math, you'll understand why both parties keep kicking this bomb down the road. Let me show you something that'll make this real. The government just closed the books on fiscal year 2025. Remember, the government does not work on a calendar year like normal people. Their fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th. So we're not talking about projections or estimates here. These are the final numbers. The government overspent by $1.78 trillion. Now, if you want to be optimistic, and honestly, I don't know why you would, you could say that's actually slightly better than last year's $1.83 trillion deficit. Progress, right? We're heading in the right direction. Except that's like celebrating because you only crashed your car at 90 miles per hour instead of 95. You're still totaled. Here's how this disaster works. It's not complicated. The government collected $5.23 trillion in taxes. That's the revenue. Where does it come from? Half of it, 2.65 trillion, comes straight from your paycheck as personal income taxes. Another massive chunk comes from FICA taxes, the Social Security and Medicare taxes that get automatically deducted whether you are an employee or self-employed. And here's what's hilarious. Corporate income taxes, 452 billion, less than 10% of what individuals pay. All those tariffs and customs duties that politicians love to talk about, 195 billion, barely a rounding error. So they collected 5.2 trillion and they spent 7 trillion. The math is brutally simple. That $1.78 trillion gap, that's money they have to borrow. And that borrowed money gets added to that $38 trillion mountain of debt we started with. But here's where it gets really fun. Let me show you where your money actually goes, because it's the part that makes the whole thing mathematically impossible to fix. The biggest expenses are Social Security and healthcare, Medicare and Medicaid. Nobody's surprised by that. But look at this number that should make your blood boil. The government spent $970 billion just on interest payments in 2025. Think about that. They're not building roads with that money. They're not funding schools. They're not paying for defense. That's pure interest. That's the cost of borrowing all that money they've already spent. And here's the kicker. They spend more on interest than they spent on the entire military. 970 billion on interest. 917 billion on national defense. We're literally paying more to service our national debt than we are to defend the country. That's 18.5% of everything the government collects going straight to interest payments. Almost 1 out of every $5 you pay in taxes doesn't do anything except pay interest on money that's already been spent. Now let me ask you a question that's going to expose the whole charade. The government is overspending by $1.8 trillion, right? What exactly are they supposed to cut to balance the budget? Who are they going to stop giving money to? Whose benefits are they going to slash? And which voters are they going to absolutely enrage in the process? Let's play this game. Say they decide to get radical. They tell all 72 million Americans receiving Social Security, sorry, you're cut off. Zero benefits. We're done. Even if they did that, which would be political suicide, it would not balance the budget. Social Security benefits are 1.5 trillion. The deficit is 1.8 trillion. You'd still be $300 billion short. And you just screwed over 72 million voters who will never forget it. What about Medicare and Medicaid? Same problem. You start cutting those benefits, you've got million more angry voters. And here's the reality. Seniors vote. They vote in massive numbers. They're organized. Any politician who seriously proposes cutting their benefits is finished. Career over. Which is exactly why neither party ever does it. Okay, what about those interest payments? 970 billion. Can we just stop paying those? Sure. If you want to trigger a sovereign debt default, crash the dollar, and watch the United States lose its status as the world's reserve currency, that process is already happening slowly. But defaulting on our debt would accelerate it from years to days. The economic chaos that would follow would make the financial crisis look like a minor inconvenience. This is why the Federal Reserve has been cutting interest rates. They're trying to lower this interest expense by making it cheaper for the government to borrow money. But here's what nobody tells you. When they cut rates, it only applies to new debt. All that existing debt, still accruing interest at the old rates. Even if they cut rates to 0% like they did in previous years, the government would still be paying hundreds of billions in interest payments. And if they try to drop rates that low again, you know what happens. Inflation explodes. We've seen this movie before. Right now, the Fed funds rate is at 4% and they're terrified to cut it too much because they remember what happened last time. Meanwhile, the debt keeps growing. It's not slowing down. It's accelerating. And the bigger it gets, the more interest they have to pay on it. It's a compounding nightmare. So even if they somehow manage to cut a couple $100 billion from interest costs next fiscal year, which would be impressive, it's not even close to being enough when you're trying to close an $1.8 trillion gap. So what else is left to cut? Look at the budget yourself. Income security, $712 billion. But you're talking about 42 million Americans on SNAP benefits, food stamps, plus low-income housing, disability assistance programs, support for infants. Are they really going to tell those people to figure it out on their own? What about VA benefits for veterans? You going to cut those? Good luck with that political firestorm. Look at everything else. It's all small, too small to matter. You could eliminate entire departments and barely make a dent in that $1.8 trillion hole. The Department of Education, the EPA, transportation, even if you zero them all out completely, which you can't because some of those functions are actually necessary, you still would not balance the budget. This is the politician's nightmare. There is no solution that does not absolutely destroy them politically. So what do? They do what politicians always do. They punt. They keep spending. They keep borrowing. And they print more money to cover the difference, which creates more inflation, which hurts the middle class and lower income Americans the most. And here's the part that's going to make you furious. It doesn't matter who's in office. Doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. Both parties do the exact same thing. Don't believe me? Let me show you the receipts. President Bush added a record amount of new debt during his time in office. Obama outdid Bush. Trump outdid Obama. Biden outdid Trump. And now we're watching to see if Trump's second term adds even more debt than Biden did. Every single president, regardless of party, has increased the debt more than the one before. Both parties stand up and give speeches about fiscal responsibility. Both parties point fingers at each other. Both parties promise they're going to get spending under control. And both parties, when they actually have power, do the exact same thing. They spend more money because the political incentives are all wrong. Cutting spending makes people angry. Spending money makes people happy. And politicians want to get re-elected. Want to know just how impossible this situation has become? All three major credit rating agencies have now downgraded America's credit rating. Moody's did it in May of this year, dropping the US from their top rating of AAA to AA1. They cited the failure of successive administrations to reverse the trend of massive annual deficits and growing interest costs. Fitch and Standard & Poor's did the same thing back in 2011 and 2023. When you've lost your perfect credit score with all three agencies, that's not a partisan issue. That's the market telling you the math doesn't work. The Penn-Wharton budget model estimates that financial markets won't tolerate US debt levels above 200% of GDP. Right now, we are at about 173%. So we've got some room, right? Except we're adding $1 trillion every few months now. That runway is getting shorter every single day. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. Doge, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. Musk initially claimed he could cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. Then it became $1 trillion. Then he said maybe he could find a few hundred billion. As of the most recent data, Doge claims to have found around $214 billion in savings. Though that number is disputed and appears to include accounting errors and exaggerations, but even if we take that number at face value, it's about 12% of the deficit. You still have 1.6 trillion to go. Here's the reality nobody wants to say out loud. Doge can find waste. There absolutely is waste in government spending. But the waste isn't the problem. The problem is the mandatory spending programs that make up the vast majority of the budget. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on debt. Those four categories alone account for more than the entire deficit. You cannot solve this problem by cutting waste and fraud. The math doesn't work. So what happens now? The debt keeps growing. Interest payments keep increasing. Eventually, and economists disagree on exactly when we hit a breaking point. Maybe it's when debt to GDP hits 200%. Maybe it's sooner, maybe it's later, but at some point, the market loses confidence. Bond buyers demand higher interest rates to compensate for the risk. Those higher rates make the debt even more expensive to service, which requires more borrowing, which drives rates even higher. It's a death spiral. When that happens, the government has three choices. default on the debt, which destroys the dollar and America's position in the global economy. Cut spending so drastically that it triggers a depression, or print money to inflate away the debt, which also destroys the dollar, but more slowly. None of these options are good. They're all catastrophic in different ways. This is what people mean when they say the debt is unsustainable. It's not some vague economic theory. It's math, cold, hard, brutal math. And the math says this ends badly. The only question is when and how bad. So what do you do with this information? First, understand that this affects you directly. Higher interest rates on the debt mean higher interest rates for your mortgage, your car loan, your credit cards. The inflation caused by printing money to cover deficits eats away at your paycheck. Every dollar you earn buys less. Your savings lose value. The debt crisis is not happening to some abstract entity called the government. It's happening to you. Second, understand that voting for one party or the other is not going to fix this. Both parties have proven over and over that they will not make the hard choices necessary to address the debt. They'll talk about it, they'll blame each other, but they won't actually do anything about it because doing something would cost them votes. Third, prepare accordingly. If you understand that the debt is going to keep growing, that interest rates are likely to remain elevated or go higher, and that inflation is going to be a persistent problem, you can make financial decisions that account for that reality. Don't wait for the government to fix this. They won't. The United States just crossed the $38 trillion in debt. They added $1 trillion in 75 days. Interest payments are now the fastest growing part of the budget. And there is no politically viable plan to stop it. This isn't doom and gloom. This is not being negative. This is looking at the numbers and understanding what they mean. The train is accelerating. Nobody's hitting the brakes. And we're all along for the ride. The question isn't whether this ends badly. The question is when and what you're going to do to protect yourself when it does. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and whether you don't trust the politicians when they tell you they've got this under control. The numbers tell a very different story. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an update. Your support lets me keep bringing you more content just like this. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.